everyone, welcome back to another video from lit.happensse Senior English, Unpacking all things Senior English. Today I'm taking you through the Module B rubric, so we're going to be unpacking that, and the resource that you're going to see me using within this video is available for free download. Check out our links at the end of the video to find out where you can access your copy. Okay, let's begin. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through a breakdown of the Module B rubric, and not only am I going to break that down with you, but I'm going to show you and model how I would do that using the document that we've created as a resource for you. So let's get started. The first thing to consider and start off with is the actual rubric itself. So looking at the key terms, having a read, looking at the paragraphs, and then maybe asking yourself some of these crucial questions or asking these of your students. So firstly, what does it mean to have that deep understanding of a text? What does it mean when a text is considered a substantial literary text? In what ways are the characters or characteristics making this text something that's considered substantial? You want to be referring to your prescribed text as you consider these prescriptions as well. And also considering, well, what skills are going to be necessary to enable or encourage a critical or close study engagement with that substantial literary text. If you take a look at the sample that's just been provided for you, you might have a look at this idea of a close critical analysis being that of context construction, the form, its content, what are its language features, what are some stylistic elements, in what ways has the student read, researched, and interpreted this key text. Have they engaged with it on a critical and personal level? Have they done some reading into the text interpretation or reception? And have they then formed some personal considerations on how that might be impacting their own interpretation of the text? Also, some things to consider in terms of its substantial nature. In what ways is this text rich and deep with important or acclaimed ideas or representations? What issues are represented? How is context deeply embedded? In what ways is society influenced at the time of which the text is coming forth? What textual integrity, if you're doing advanced, is being played out here? In what ways is the form, the context, the ideas, the language, everything being produced to form a whole and enduring narrative? And in terms of the skills, which HSC verbs are being used here, what guidance is that offering students in terms of how they're meant to analyze and examine their text and how they're actually meant to respond and compose? And the last thing to really think about with the rubric is, okay, if these are its key elements and this is its core, in what ways do I as the teacher see this represented in the prescribed text that I will be teaching my students? If students have done an initial reading of this text, you might actually ask them to form some initial considerations or even do a class brainstorm where you actually think about with the class all together what makes their text substantial, what have they been initially able to identify in terms of context, form, ideas, techniques, and using that to build the momentum for the eventual analysis. Now, what you and your students might do is have an actual breakdown in the components of the rubric. You can start off by just asking or encouraging the students to try and have a think about the statements and separate them according to the statements that are learning to and learning content versus learning how and skills based. Another thing that you can also do is actually engage students in pulling out the key rubric terms. I put some suggestions up there just straight from the rubric, and actually engaging students in a discussion about these terms and using that to activate any background knowledge they have about other substantial literary texts that they have read, and perhaps are not the prescribed text, but that information and that learning experience that you as a teacher can lean on to encourage them to consider the worthiness of the prescribed text that they will be studying. And then the last and probably the most important step is actually to have students now trying to branch off from these synonyms and look at branch off from these key terms and look at developing their own synonyms. Not only is this going to show that they have a deep understanding of the rubric, but it'll actually be the key terms that will enable them to get into discussion about and around their text as well. So I'm going to take you through a few that I think, are really effective. So this idea of the critical understanding, we might look at that evaluation. We might look at what's discerning. We might actually think about it as a critique. If we're looking at the term substantial, something that's significant, considerable, meaningful, impactful. You might be looking at a substantial point, and you might be saying that the argument is substantial or meaningful or considerable evidence. If you're looking at the term qualities, you might be, considering unique traits, the characteristics, the distinguishable features, hallmark traits, defining aspects. If I'm looking at this key term of reception and looking at audience reception, you might be looking at a critical reception, perhaps, if that aligns with what you're doing with your advanced module B. But looking at audience response, interpretation, reaction, engagement with. And then when you're looking at the perspectives that have been given, looking at multiple outlooks, angles, viewpoints, you might be looking at narrative perspective, critical perspective, personal perspective. And then lastly, with that key term of appreciation, we are looking at a literary appreciation here. So it might be looking at the recognition, the valuation, the understanding of its importance, its connection, its merit, its value, and looking at appreciation in that way and in that lens. Now, lastly, once we've broken down the rubric, we want to start thinking about how we may consolidate our understanding of it so that we can eventually produce a response or an approach. So we're looking at the bones of a rubric thesis here. So what we mean by that is that we just have a statement that a student may use to help drive them to then analyze their prescribed text. And the thesis statement is all to do with the key aspects of the statement, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they might be doing it. So right before I get the thesis statement to be created, it is another great activity to try and rewrite it in your own words just to ensure that consolidation has been established. So with that consolidation, if I was to put the rubric in my own words, I might say something like, a critical study means that we're exploring a rich and substantial literary text so that we consider how it makes meaning, how it has been successful in its creation of meaning based on how an audience has interpreted and received it, and also how we might use it to make meaning in our own sense of self, and how we as an individual reader can form an interpretation and an appreciation of this substantial literary text. Now, this can be a small paragraph if you're encouraging students to practice their chunk writing skills. It could be a sentence or two. It could be dot points. The aim here is just to make sure that students in their own words can say what the rubric is, what they're going to do with it, how and maybe why. What is the ultimate outcome? Well, the ultimate outcome is value, appreciation, perspective. Now, lastly, in this video, I'm going to take you through how you might help students create that rubric thesis. If you can see in the top right hand of the document, I do have some sample sentence stems here for you. And these are all statements using the specific terms of the rubric. And hopefully, the student will engage and finish that off and have themselves their own broad, generic rubric thesis that is a starting point. It will change along the way, but it is something that's going to establish what they're meant to be doing now when they're looking at their prescribed text. So you can see that the first one says, examining the significant context of a substantial literary text enhances our understanding of text by enabling us to see the worldview of the text, by allowing audiences at the time to deeply connect and resonate with the meaning of the text, or by offering enduring value and interpretation of the ideas within, for example. And there's two more sentence stems. We could do something similar. This is a great activity to do as in whole class. You might do the first one or any of the three together. Then a student might actually complete one in small groups or pairs, and then create their own. And if you've got advanced students as well and you're encouraging them to go that extra level, the sentence stem can be used as a sample, but they can actually substitute the key terms, or perhaps challenge them to look at all three examples and then create their own based on kind of an amalgamation of all three. So there's lots of different ways in. Always remember to scaffold according to the students that you have. You might find that you need to scaffold in a few different ways if you've got different groups and varieties of students, particularly if you're teaching a mixed cohort class. You might be thinking about, in what ways will I be able to help the students who might be struggling a little bit more achieve something? How can I support my mid-range students with an example and allow them to then, formulate their own response? And how do I actually scaffold in a way that I enable my more top-end students to not be locked in by my own interpretation or the thoughts of the class, but to actually be able to springboard off of that and create their own? So I thought that hopefully that's been helpful for you today. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and have a look. There is going to be another video coming out in terms of how to approach the rubric with the text types and prescribed texts at hand, and we'll get that to you as soon as possible. Take care.